I'm not sure where to put my arms with no handlebars. It's kind of awkward. What is going on, guys? Welcome to episode 4 of the 2006 KTM 200 build. If you're new here, the goal is to rebuild this bike as capable as possible for hard enduro and then race it at Silver Kings Hard Enduro this June. Now, I can't rely on improving the bike alone, as Silver Kings is a nasty race that requires some technical skill and a lot of endurance. So I've been going through a training program with MXFitCo, trying to get in shape and make sure that I am as capable as possible for this race as well. Over the last couple of weeks, I have been refreshing my KTM 350 for the cross-country race season, as well as took a trip down to Arizona to ride. That trip did not quite go as planned, but we had a great time nonetheless. I posted videos on all that maintenance and refresh for my 350 as well as the Arizona trip. Both of those are linked in the description if you'd like to check them out. At the time of filming this intro, I just reached 99,000 subscribers. We are getting so close to 100,000, so I have to ask, if you do enjoy this video and you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please click that button down below. As a thank you for 100,000 subscribers, I will be bringing one of you guys out here to ride with me this spring. So once again, if you do click that subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate it. But we have a ton to do in today's episode, so let's jump into it. To get started, I made a couple of mistakes in previous episodes that I need to fix. And what is awesome about these mistakes is that they were caught by my viewers. I never claimed to be perfect or be an expert on everything, and this is one of those awesome things about the internet. Navarro let me know that I was not using the correct bar clamp mounts, which I should have realized given the gap. Robert over at Urmosi also reached out after watching the last episode to let me know that the mounts were wrong and that he had the correct mount kit on the way. So guys, don't ever be afraid to call me out if you think I'm wrong or messed something up, because I am always still learning. After replacing those mounts, I got the handlebars all set up in these soft bar clamps, which I am really looking forward to trying. The concept makes a lot of sense, especially on a two-stroke that vibrates, so we'll see how they work once this thing is up and running. The thought behind this design is that it essentially makes your handlebars float in a rubber bushing, which will provide some give to absorb vibrations and small chatter in the terrain. Installation of the handlebars did take me a minute to get perfect. These bar clamps claim 10-minute install, which isn't unreasonable, but I certainly spent longer than that, as I'd have the bars a millimeter or two off to the left or right, and it's tricky to slide the bars within the rubber even when loose, so I would have to pull the top clamps off, adjust the bars, and retighten until I was fully pleased with their mounting location. The bar clamps come with this nifty spacer tool that forces those bushings and the other components right to where they belong while you align and tighten everything. Top it all off with a bar pad built specifically for this clamp, and we've got bars, baby. Now, before I tell you about my second mistake, let's finish up the controls now that the handlebars are mounted. I bought this front brake on eBay, and it originally came off of a 2023 KTM 250 SXF. While the stock Brembo was good, they've become even more refined over the years, and I want this front end to feel as responsive and comfortable as that of my 2022 KTM 350. So in conjunction with this front brake upgrade, a clutch upgrade is in order as well. The stock master cylinder on this bike can legally vote, which means master cylinders have come a long way. I've got a brand new and modern Magura master cylinder for this bike, which will go a long way in the feel and performance of this clutch. This master cylinder will bolt up directly to the same line and slave cylinder and still use mineral oil. I got a lot of great comments in the first episode of this build series where I was discussing possibilities for clutch upgrades, and this ended up being the best option, so let's get it installed. Oh my god! I'm gonna fucking tight. Holy cow! Woo! I'd be willing to bet this is a setup you've never seen before. I ended up bolting the master cylinder to the handlebar to give myself the leverage I needed, and then the bolt broke no problem. Notice this hydraulic line has a bit of damage to the housing. If this were a giveaway build, I'd be replacing the line, but currently it has no leaks or ill effects, so I wrapped it in some electrical tape, and that'll be the solution indefinitely unless it one day fails. I cleaned some of the rust and grime off of those threads so that installation into the new master would go smoothly, and so that there would not be any contamination in the system. As I had hoped, the installation process could not have gone more smoothly. The line threaded right into the new master, and I installed the slave cylinder with a new gasket. From there, it was time to begin the bleeding process, so I poured some mineral oil into the master cylinder and got to work. So guys, a little overview of my bleed process here. It tends to work quite well for me. I start with a vacuum bleeder. That gets the majority through the line, the majority of the air out of the system, and then I move to the traditional bleed method. So now that I'm close, I have a functional clutch, I have resistance, I can hear the plates moving when I engage and disengage the clutch. And if you watch up here, as I pull, I'm going to get a few more air bubbles out of here. Pull the clutch 5, 6, 7 times, get some pressure built up in there, get any other air bubbles out of the top. And then while pulling the clutch lever in, I am going to loosen this bolt, and you can see fluid force through that line. Close the bolt with the clutch lever still pulled in, and then release. Using that method, the clutch had forced pressure in the line, unlike the vacuum, which purely sucks fluid through the line. So the nice thing about that method is it really will force any air through the system, whereas the vacuum, it can kind of pull fluid through the line, maybe around air bubbles. But I'm thrilled. We've got a nice functional clutch, and this thing honestly pulls so much nicer than the stock one. Now I accidentally set the camera out of focus here as I reinstalled the master cylinder cap, and I am really sorry about that. And while we're down here by the slave cylinder, it's time to show you guys my second mistake. In episode 2, I drove the countershaft seal all the way in until it was flush. Somebody left me a comment that it should actually be flush with the case, and they were correct. I tested this out, and with the seal all the way in, this left a little bit too much clearance, which maybe could have allowed oil to escape. So I got a new countershaft seal and installed it flush. This case has a little bit of damage here, but that won't be an issue because the seal still sits far enough in. Now, let's throw a sprocket on this thing. Only the best sprockets for this KTM 200. You know we're running dirt tricks for this build. Made in the USA and backed by an incredible warranty that you're unlikely to ever need, these sprockets kick ass. You can see I've got both 12 and 13 tooth front sprockets here. I anticipate running the 12 at Silver Kings, but I'm starting with the 13 as it'll be a closer comparison to what I was running before when I initially compare the bike before and after the build. New frame guards aren't essential, but they're one of those little touches that goes a long way in the finished product. I cleaned up the electrical components to get them reinstalled on the bike, and all I did for those was use Dawn dish soap and scrub them down in the sink before blowing all of the connections out with compressed air. You'll notice here I'm adding just a little bit of oil to my throttle side handlebar. People seem to have mixed feelings about this, but from my experience, it's always resulted in a silky smooth throttle. Yes, if your grip is open to allow for bark busters or bar ends, it can let dirt in, but it is a very easily serviceable item. With the electrical reinstalled, I was no longer going to be playing around with routing wires near the front end of the bike, so I decided it was time to fully finish the front end. I installed the front number plate from MXPlastics.com, and for the fork guards, I actually made the late decision to run some ProTech full wrap fork guards that offer additional protection, as where I plan to take this bike, it's likely to take some nasty spills, and damaged stanchions are no fun to deal with. If you are in the Bozeman area, Mikey over at Deja Moto keeps these stocked. Time to get going with the fresh kit from DeCal Works. I installed the fork guard graphics before bolting them up with some new fast metric hardware. And while I get the rest of the front end graphics installed, thank you DeCal Works, the kit turned out incredible, I would like to talk a little bit about OnX Off-Road. You may have heard me talk about OnX in some of my riding videos now, but OnX is an essential app every time I hit the trails. Not only does it perform basic functions you want like route tracking, but the Elite version offers so much more. For example, with Elite, you can look at recent imagery. In a place like Montana, this will be super useful in the spring to help determine if trails are rideable yet or still covered in snow without having to go all the way out there and find out. You can also download offline maps so that whether or not you have cell service, you can safely and reliably navigate your way through any terrain. OnX Off-Road has a toggleable snow version that shows you avalanche forecasts, trail conditions, slope angle to help you stay safe, and more. Finally, with an Elite membership, you get access to discounts from a long list of great companies. OnX is committed to keeping you safe and informed out in the backcountry. Their free version is great if that's your cup of tea and meets your needs, but if you are interested in an Elite membership, you can use the code KP20 for 20% off, and that is linked in the description below. I gotta give a big thank you to OnX for being a supporter of the channel this year. Now let's top this front end off with a front number plate graphic and look at those two KTMs looking spicy. It may now become clear that we're going for a matching look between the 350 and the 200, and I am stoked about it. Finish her off with a Fender Boys decal under the front fender, and this front end is dialed. Now that we've got a sexy front end, it's about time to get the booty of this thing back together. So let's start with the rear shock. Remember, Daniel over at DSC Motorsports revalved this thing for me to make it more of a hard enduro setup so that I can get my ass kicked at Silver Kings. I bought a new shock bumper, but thought it would look better black, so I dyed it using some RIT dye, which is a tip I learned from Cameron Niemela years ago. Speaking of Cam, he's currently going through stem cell treatment in his battle against cancer and still needs support, So if you'd like to help him out financially, there's a donation link below. Or if you don't want to donate, I'm going to link his Instagram. Just go leave him a comment on a recent post. I know all of the positive thoughts and messages go a long way. Shock reassembly went relatively smoothly, and I always laugh when I see myself doing this with my jaw in clips. In high focus wrenching situations, it's like I try to guide what I'm doing with my jaw, and it's kind of comical. I got the shock together and began the bleed process through the compression adjuster hole. I was meticulous in cycling the shaft in and out and tilting the shock up and down to move all of the air to the top and out. Once I had the shock body completely back together, I looked on the bench to see my brand new piston bands sitting right there. Big ol' facepalm moment. I ripped the shock back apart, replaced those crusty old piston bands, and repeated the bleed process. Once again, Mikey over at Deja Moto charged this thing up with nitrogen for me, so big thanks to Mike, and the shock was ready for a spring. I gotta thank my brother one more time for this sweet 3D printed shock spanner wrench. My brother has told me about countless tools he's printed when he needs them, which definitely has getting a 3D printer on my mind. Getting the shock back on the bike opened up the ability to start getting a lot more components installed, and I had my mind set on seeing this thing with 2 fresh Urmosi wheels. I selected the Shinko Cheater 525 tire to start with for this build, which is the exact same tread pattern as the 525 Shinko, but in the gummy rubber 505 Cheater compound. This thing should kill it in the rocks. Now, after some comments in the last couple of videos regarding my use of Murphy's and then a bit more research, I ultimately decided $5 a tube for proper mousse lube is probably worth it when you consider the cost of a mousse. If Murphy's is even a little bit less effective, that means mousses will need to be replaced more often, and mousses are not cheap. Speaking of replacing mousses, I probably shouldn't have installed this one as it's pretty well worn out, so I'll be getting a new one and swapping it out soon. For now, she's gonna ride. This tire install could not have gone smoother, partially because the mousse is so worn, but it literally took me about 3 minutes. I installed the rotor with new fast metric bolts, and then it was time for the sprocket. Once again, a freshie from Dirt Tricks. I went with the 50 tooth and once again have both 12 and 13 tooth options for the front. My bead was not fully seated, and to fix that with a mousse, I just blast air straight into the tube hole in the rim and it seats that bead. Dirt Tricks coming through with that custom KP laser engraving. Tie it together with an Urmosi wheel and a Shinko tire. This thing is sick. Urmosi wheels are Enduro specific wheels with dual bearings on the drive side, high grade aluminum, and heavy duty spokes. These things are built to be put to the test, and I plan to do exactly that. One more shout out to Rabaconda for making the job easy, and before installing the wheel, the rear brake needs to be installed. If you ride hard enduro, you know how important a rear disc guard is, so I've got one here from Bulletproof Designs. This thing is a beautiful billet design, and you can tell from its thickness that it means business. Scrub-a-dub-dub that rear brake into sync, get it looking nice, and then swapping that disc guard onto the caliper was pretty straightforward. It replaces the entire OEM caliper mount, so I pulled the pads and slid the mount away from the caliper. 3 components from that mount needed to be swapped to the Bulletproof Designs guard, and then it was all ready to go back together. I really like the brake pin design on KTM's, where instead of threading in, it's just 2 cotter pins. Slide that puppy onto the swing arm, and this shark fin is going to be all scratched up before we know it. But you know what that means? My rotor won't be. I installed the rear wheel with no hassle, and then decided to get a fresh chain on this gal. I did go with an O-ring chain. I know they rob the bike of power, and that does matter more on a small bore bike, but they last so much longer than a standard 520 chain when riding off-road. Maybe I'll consider a chain swap to get as much power out of the bike as I can, specifically for Silver Kings, but we'll see how it feels. Rear wheel installed and chain tensioned. I think that's a pretty good progress report for episode 4. So that's going to do it for episode 4. Click that subscribe button down below. Help me reach 100,000. Cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Merch drop coming in the next 3 to 4 weeks. This is one of them. Weird People Go Fast. I hope you guys like this and the rest of the drop. This will be coming along with the first episode of the KLX 110, which will be the next giveaway build. Seriously, can't thank you guys enough for the continued support. So stoked to continue progress on this thing and then move on to other builds. There never seems to be enough time in the day, but I am enjoying every second of it. Now enjoy a couple beauty shots of this thing's current progress, and I'll see you guys soon with the next video.